Locals had always whispered about the cabin, tucked deep in the Bulga Forest, no electricity, no phone signal, no real path in or out. It had earned a quiet nickname over the years. It was known as the Witch's Hut. It wasn't on maps. It wasn't meant for visitors. But in September of 2021, 2 people arrived at that cabin for what they called a romantic getaway, a fresh start. They were Dee Annear and her partner, Rohen Hanson. They brought food, drinks and sleeping bags. They told their friends that they just needed space, some time to reconnect. But by sunrise the next morning, only one of them would walk out. By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. And guys, I am definitely not AI. I'm just dyslexic, and I'm trying my best to read. For instance, could an AI do this? I don't think they can. I don't think so. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing, with multiple uploads every single week. So if all of this sounds like your kind of thing, then make sure you hit subscribe now and turn on all notifications. And now for today's silly little question. What's your favourite way to cook eggs? Give me the dishes down in the comments. All of your support over on Patreon, as well as right here via channel memberships on YouTube, are all so appreciated, and I really can't thank you all enough. However, thank you. But now, on with the video. Bulga Forest is thick, humid, and almost impossible to navigate at night. There are no marked tracks. There's little to no phone signal. And there's only one way in or out by car. It's the kind of place that you'd only find if you were really trying to get away from everything and everyone, or of course if you didn't want to be found. When police arrived on the morning of September the 18th, 2021, the first thing they saw was Dee Annear, no longer breathing. She was lying just outside the front door of the cabin, face up, shoes off. The man who'd called the police, Rohen Hanson, wasn't waiting nearby. He'd already left the area, but not before speaking to first responders and telling them the same story that he'd given on the phone. He said that Dee had suffered injuries in a car accident the night before. He said that she was alive when he left to go and find help, but when he came back, she was now gone. But what police found next cast that version of events into doubt almost immediately.
I stayed with her, fell asleep. When I came back here, she seemed okay. She seemed okay, but I didn't want to leave her.
Inside the cabin, there were streaks of red on the walls and the floorboards. There was also a mattress that was missing from the scene, and in the bush nearby, it was found dumped and soaked through. There were dark red stains visible on the fabric. Investigators would later learn that Hanson had actually tried to clean the cabin before calling anyone for help. They also found a discarded beer bottle shattered in a corner. There was no sign that any medical aid had been attempted on Dee. There were no bandages, ice, or efforts of any help at all. And 3.5 kilometers away, Hanson's ute or pickup truck was found half submerged in a ditch. So the crash that he mentioned had indeed happened, but only one person had been in the vehicle at the time that it went off the road, and it was not Dee. This road accident was not the end of her life. So what's actually happened?
38-year-old Rohen James Hanson's case was mentioned briefly in Foster Local Court this morning after he was charged with murdering Dee Annear. The 34-year-old's body was found in a cabin on Pole Dump Forest Road in the Bulga Forest on Saturday morning, police setting up a crime scene soon after. At around 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, investigators arrested Hanson at a home in Killawarra Street, Wingham. He was taken to Taree Police Station and charged with murder. The 38-year-old was refused bail today. The matter now heads to Taree Local Court on November 23.
In his second police interview, recorded just days after his arrest, Rohen Hanson sat slumped across the table. He spoke softly, almost rehearsed. She hit me first, he told detectives. I called her a name, and she came at me with a beer bottle. I ducked, then I tackled her. I didn't mean it. I just tackled her into the wall. It wasn't the first story that he told. In fact, it wasn't even the second. In total, Hanson would give police 4 different versions of what had happened on the night that Dee Annear met her end. In each one of these, the violence escalated or shifted entirely. They really couldn't pin anything down. But according to the people who knew them best, violence in this relationship was not new. Dee's mother, Carolyn Butt, told the jury that she had once seen Hanson punch her daughter in the head during a visit. Another time, she said he headbutted Dee on a camping trip. And then there was Janelle Reynolds, a close friend, who also described a brutal scene in their home. She recalled Dee being thrown into a coffee table and the glass top shattering. She said that Hanson then stomped on her. Reynolds remembered trying to lift shards from Dee's scalp and mopping up the red from the carpet. She also told the court something chilling. She said, "I remember thinking, one day he's going to kill her." Hanson's defense did not deny the violence. In fact, they leaned into it. They argued that both Hanson and Dee had violent tendencies, that they both argued constantly, and that alcohol made everything worse. They said on the night in question, it was just another fight, but this one went too far. Hanson's lawyer told the court he never meant to kill her. He accepted responsibility. That's why he tried to plead guilty to manslaughter. However, the prosecution pushed back hard. They pointed to Dee's injuries, her skull fractures, her jaw, nose and rib fractures. She had lung lacerations and signs of pressure to the neck. There were also over 100 bruises and scratches across her body. This wasn't one push. This wasn't a tackle. The words of Crown Prosecutor Carl Young as he spoke to the jury. This was sustained, deliberate violence. It was murder. In the end, the jury had to choose between 2 narratives: a volatile couple whose latest fight had just ended in tragedy, or a man with a long documented history of atrocious behaviour, someone who finally went too far and then lied about it again and again. The truth, they discover, was hidden in the hours before that emergency call was made. Friday, September the 17th. Dee and Rohen were seen on CCTV at a supermarket in Comboyne, a quiet town about an hour from the hut. They bought supplies for their weekend away. Nothing about their behaviour stood out, but there was one detail. Dee already had a black eye. Police would later confirm that this black eye wasn't from the incident that ended her life at the cabin. The couple had planned this trip to the wilderness as a fresh start. They'd been together since 2017, on and off, and though the relationship was marred by frequent fights, many of them that looked horrific to outsiders, they still always circled back to each other. This time they were driving to the pole dump hut, situated in Bulga Forest. This is a rough logger's cabin in the middle of the bush, almost entirely deserted. They called it the Witch's Hut. The couple planned to stay for 4 nights. At some point that evening, something happened on the road. Hanson drove their silver Holden rodeo ute off the road and into a ditch along the pole dump road. He was alone in the vehicle at that time, but exactly what happened next depends entirely on which version of Hanson's story that you believe. In some, he went back to the cabin and found Dee already hurt. In others, she attacked him over the car crash. He said that she swung a beer bottle at him. He says that he ducked, and then that he tackled her in self-defense. He claimed that in doing this, she hit her head on the wall and went down hard. However, there was one major issue with this story. The autopsy would show that her injuries weren't consistent with one single blow, and she didn't pass away instantly. There were signs of multiple impacts and time passing, and as that time passed, choices were made. Outside the hut as temperatures dropped, in the early hours of Saturday morning, Dee's body was left out on the ground. She was given no blanket, no cover, no attempts at CPR. There was not even a call for help until almost 11 hours later, and that delay would become one of the most damning parts of this case. Because if this really had been a tragic accident, why didn't Hanson try to save his partner? By the time that Rohen Hanson first stood trial in April of 2024, nearly 3 years had passed since Dee's death. The courtroom in Coffs Harbour was packed. Dee's mother sat through every hour of testimony. Her friends made the trip from Wingham and beyond. For many of them, this was their first time hearing the full scope of Dee's injuries and of Hanson's lies laid out in public. The prosecution called witness after witness. They showed crime scene photos from inside the hut. They played audio from the 000 calls, which is like 911 in Australia. They replayed Hanson's conflicting police interviews, and they read aloud messages and past allegations, many never formally reported, of physical attacks that had happened. But despite all of this evidence, something didn't land with the jury. The defense leaned heavily on reasonable doubt. They said that Hanson had admitted to causing Dee's death, that he was overwhelmed and that he simply panicked. That yes, his lies were indeed cowardly, but they were not proof of murder. The jury deliberated for more than 22 hours across multiple days, and then, nothing. They could not reach a verdict. The judge could only apologise to Dee's family, acknowledging the emotional toll, saying, "The court simply does not have words that can convey our sympathy." He said, "I'm sorry today has resulted in you being left without that closure." The trial was declared as a mistrial, and Rohen Hanson, despite everything, remained legally unconvicted. If Hanson's version of events was true, that Dee had hit him with a bottle, and that he tackled her in self-defense, then her injuries should have matched that single spontaneous act. But as we know, they didn't. In fact, not even close. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Alan Kaller, had seen many cases of DV, but he said that this one stood out. In fact, in court, he described Dee's injuries as catastrophic. So Hanson's story really did not make sense. Remember, there was that long list, 100 scratches and bruises, evidence of a pressure injury to the neck, and much, much more. There was no way, Dr. Kaller said, that this kind of trauma came from a single tackle, especially not if she'd fallen once, hit her head, and been knocked unconscious, as Hanson had of course claimed, and she definitely hadn't passed instantly either. The doctor explained that Dee's injuries suggested a sustained attack over a long period of time, the kind of attack that couldn't be accidental, the kind that involved force, repetition and intent. He also noted something else, the spatter inside the hut. This did not match a single impact location, which indicated movement, struggle, panic, and just violence. And then of course there was the mattress. It was found dumped in a bush, soaked in red. Hanson did later admit that he tried to hide it because he freaked out. His words to the police played in court. "I threw it out because it looked like I murdered her, and I just started myself." That statement, raw unfiltered, became a centerpiece of the Crown's case. They argued that someone acting in self-defense does not scrub stains, dump evidence, and leave a woman alone in the cold for hours. If what he was saying was true, then that person would call for help. They would try to explain. They would not lie in 4 different ways before then telling their truth.
Constant fights, yelling and arguing. That's how 2 neighbours of Dee Annear and Rohen Hanson described the pair's relationship in statements read to the court on day 3 of Hanson's murder trial. One saying, "I remember hearing the 2 of them arguing in the house at least 2 or 3 times a week. When the night came, they would start up." Today's statements coming off Hanson's mother took the stand late yesterday, detailing an argument she says she once witnessed between the 42-year-old and Ms. Annear. Dee hit him in the head with a beer bottle and a scuffle happened. Push and shove, and she fell back and hit her head. Rohen Hanson is accused of murdering Ms. Annear in a remote hut in the Bulga Forest, west of Port Macquarie, during a camping trip in September 2021. He maintains he acted in self-defence, claiming the 34-year-old attacked him with a beer bottle after they had been drinking. Hanson has pleaded not guilty to murder. The trial is expected to take 2 weeks. Alison Paul, NBN News.
The second trial was held in Newcastle in mid-2025, and it wasn't a long one. This time, the jury had the benefit of hindsight. They heard about the first trial's deadlock, about the years of delay, and the pain that was carried by Dee's family. But more importantly, they heard everything again, but now with even less room for doubt. The prosecution leaned in harder. They played the 000 recordings once again. In one of them, Hanson says, "There's no reviving her. She's passed away while I went out to get help." In another, he insists that it was a car crash, that he hadn't even been in the room when it happened, but the evidence was overwhelming. The autopsy, of course, did not match any of his stories, and the spatter in the cabin told its own truth, and the dumped mattress, Hanson had no reasonable explanation for that, except the same old story of panic. The jury began deliberating at 10:40 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 2 p.m. the next day, they had made up their minds. They were unanimous, and he was guilty. Hanson showed no reaction as the verdict was read. Justice Ian Harrison thanked the jury for their close attention, for their careful consideration of a case marred by deception and cruelty. In the gallery, Dee's family cried quietly. Finally, some relief. It had taken 4 years, 2 trials, and an unclimbable mountain of grief. But now, finally, a conviction. Rohen James Hanson is now awaiting sentence. He will return to the Supreme Court on September 5th, 2025. The court has already heard the worst of what happened at the witch's hut, but this one final step of justice will decide how many years he'll spend behind bars for what he did, whether he will ever get the chance to walk free again, and whether Dee's loved ones get the closest thing to closure that a system can offer. Rohen Hanson spoke his lies loudly, but the evidence and the truth would not be silenced forever. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.